Okay, so I want to ask you a question today. And my question is this: what are you afraid of? Okay? I think it was Wednesday morning, I was praying for a group in the church, and this question just popped into my head, and it was, what are you afraid of? And I had to think about it for a while, because I wasn't sure how to pray about this further. And then I asked the question for myself: what am I afraid of? And it's easy to say that, oh no, I'm not afraid of anything. And I just saw someone go like this. Okay, so guys, I like this interaction, keep it coming. But it's easy to say that I am not afraid of anything. And I like to say that I am fearless. Okay? And I say I am fearless because I cannot, but He can. Okay, so I'm not saying I'm fearless because I'm so cool or strong or whatever, but I'm fearless because God is on my side and He can. But that morning, things came to my head and I was like, okay, so what am I afraid of? And for a moment I was thinking, and there were some things that I'm going through at the moment where I'm asking the following question: what if? But I'm asking what if in a negative sense. Like for instance, what if Eskom stops working? That's a big fear question, right? For most of us, if we say, what if I do not have a job anymore tomorrow? That is something that is stirring fear in my heart. Do you get me? You can have other kinds of what ifs. What if I get $1 million tomorrow from someone? That's not a fear question, right? Hopefully not. But what if can highlight our fears? Do you hear me? And so today I'm asking you, what are you afraid of? And I'm not asking you so that you will get more fearful. I'm asking you so that we can get rid of that fear. I'm asking you because God has not called us to be fearful. God has not called us to walk on this earth as being afraid and asking the whole time, what if? What if? What if? He has called us to walk victorious. And I'm going to go through 1 Samuel 17. And I want us today to listen and be like, how can I throw off this fear? How can I get rid of this fear? What is the answer? And the story of 1 Samuel 17, if you know it, and you probably all know it very well, is the story of David and Goliath. So when I asked God, what is your message for Citygate today? He said to me, David and Goliath. Now I'm sure the kids love the story. I sure do too. But we're going to go through a few verses, and I want to start with verse 1. 1 Samuel 17 says, Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sokol in Judah. They pitched camp. And they used a lot of funny names I can't pronounce. But the whole point is they gathered for war. There is a war happening in 1 Samuel 17. There is a war happening today. And I'm not talking about us against another country. I'm talking about us. There is a war happening. There is a battle every day that you and I have to walk through. Especially if we want to overcome sin in our lives. Especially if we want to walk in the calling, the purpose that God has for you. There is a battle. Especially if you want to take ground for God. There will be a battle. There will be war. If you want to bring change in your family, there will be a war. If you stand up for what is right, if you stand up for justice, there will be a battle. Do you hear me? Why? Because the enemy who is real, guys, you need to know this. There is an enemy. There is a devil. Okay? Some people do not believe in the enemy. There is an enemy. So if there's an enemy, he does not want you to overcome your sin. He does not want you to be obedient. He does not want you to take ground for Jesus. He does not want you to stand for justice and righteousness. He does not want you to be obedient. So if he does not want this for you, of course he's going to try and resist you. So sometimes I say to myself, if life is too easy, am I doing anything right? And so what happens here with David and Goliath? There's a battle between the Philistines and the Israelites. And the Philistines are on one side of the hill, and the Israelites are on the other side of the hill. And in the valley, and there's a valley in between, and every day in the valley, there's this big giant who gets out there, and he's like huge. He's 3 meters tall. I think the tip of his spear is like, 7 kilograms or something like that. This guy's huge. And they give such a good description of him that it's like no one else is described like that, like this giant Goliath in the Bible. So that we will know this guy is intimidating, he's big, he's strong, he's got a big voice, and he's not afraid. And he says to them, let me already read it. Verse 8, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. And you know how these Israelites who've seen so many victories, how God has come for them, how he has defeated the enemy, how they respond, they say then, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And another translation said they were greatly afraid. This guy was just standing in the valley saying things, and they got afraid. A whole army afraid of this one guy. And then what does Jesse do? Jesse is the father of David, and Jesse sends David to the battlefield, and he says to him, go and take these things to your brothers. We know the story, right? And as David gets there to the battlefield, here comes Goliath, and he says these things again. But listen how David responds to what Goliath is saying. Verse 26. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? David is a teenage boy coming to a battlefield, and all the Israelites run away. They are afraid. Even Saul, who's probably the tallest of the whole army when you go back to Samuel, and he is also not standing up to Goliath. But here comes David, who is a teenage boy, and he says, how dare this guy defy the armies of the living God? What is the difference between David and a whole army who is afraid of Goliath? That's clear. That's clear. What does David see? What do you see when you look at your fears? Do you see a giant? Or do you see an uncircumcised Philistine? David wasn't looking at the natural. He wasn't even interested in the natural. All he heard was someone who came against his living God. And David knew God. And he knew, not a chance, how dare this guy stand up against the living God? What's going on here? Why is everyone running away? Do you not know your God? Can you not remember what he has done for you? Now today, when you look at your fears, what ifs, Are you looking at the natural? Yes, Eskom may not make it. Or are you looking in the spiritual, but Lord, what do you want to do? Because in the end of the day, this is not about me or my comfort. And trust me, electricity is very comfortable. But it is about you and your glory. So if there's a giant in the valley coming, am I seeing the giant or am I seeing the uncircumcised Philistine? If there's sin in my life that do not want to go away, am I seeing it as a giant too big for me? Am I saying, how dare you? How dare you want to bring me down? What are you seeing today? Are you looking in the natural or are you looking in the spiritual? What ifs? What ifs? What ifs? Now I want to share with you. The moment you see in the spiritual, it's not like the battle is over. It hasn't even begun. The moment you see in the spiritual and see, oh, this is not just something that my family is doing, there's something spiritually going on here. What does the Bible say? Our fight is not against flesh and blood. So please don't go out here and go slaughter people. You know, our fight is against spiritual. Our fight is spiritual. Against strongholds, principalities. Okay? But what if you start walking in the spirit and not just in the natural anymore? What if you walk in a shop and you're not just walking in the natural anymore, but you trust the Holy Spirit to work through you and you work in the Spirit? What if you look at your family, our country, this nation, this community, not in the natural anymore, but in the spiritual? What happens if you stand up and say, how dare you? There's resistance. And we see it clearly here with Goliath and David. And the first thing that happens is your heart or your intentions will be attacked or questioned. Listen to this. Your heart or your intentions will be attacked or questioned. See what happens in verse 28. It says, David's older brother heard him speaking with the men. He burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. His own brother told him, I know how wicked your heart is. You know, let's translate that to today. You say you're a believer, but you're doing that. Who's heard that before? It's like your heart and your intentions are questioned. The moment you start walking in the Spirit and you stand up to things, your heart and your intentions will be questioned. A few years ago, I work sometimes, and my boss wrote me a letter, and it was this intense letter, but one of the things she said was this. She said, you call yourself a believer, but you don't even greet me in the mornings. And you know, in that moment, I have to make a choice. Either I'm like, oh no, what did I do wrong? Where didn't I greet her? Oh no, I'm not really shining for Jesus now. Or I can be like, no, wait. Don't get distracted. And this is the thing what David did here. What did he do in verse, it's in another page, 29 and 30. Now what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. He turned from them. He turned from his brother and he continued. He turned from his brother and he continued. Guys, sometimes people are going to question your intention and your heart. But if you sit with Jesus, you know where you're at. So do not let them discourage you or take you away from the purpose that God has for you and the thing that you have to find. If you are fighting sin, you will experience this. So the question is, or the fear, what is the fear that we battle here? Are you afraid about what people think and say? That is the fear we see here. Because if someone says to me, you say you're a believer, but you do this and this and this, surely my fear is then, oh wait, what do they think? And I want to correct that. I want them to think very nicely of me, right? Well, I have just some information for you guys. We are not called here to please people. And if we are trying to please people, we're not going to get very far. Because we'll go everywhere people want us to go. We are here to please God. And if He tells us to do something, we do it. Not to please people, not to hurt them either, but to please God. Okay? And so a fear that creeps in often with us is that we want to please people. We want people to like us. But that can keep us from walking in what God has for us. What did David do? David's trust was in God's reputation, not his own intentions. Okay? David's trust was in God's reputation, not in his own intentions. Let's go to the second one. Your abilities will be questioned. The moment you do something or start walking in your purpose or stand up spiritually, your abilities will be questioned. This happens in verse 33. Saul replied, so David was taken to Saul, and Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. David's abilities are questioned because he is too young. Your abilities might be questioned. Maybe it's like, no, I'm too old. What? I need to run the kidsman, just an example. No, I'm too old. Oh, I've had the sin. I've walked with it for so long. I'm too old. Your abilities to fight it is questioned. But you know what? And what fear creeps in here is that I am not qualified. It's the fear of I am not qualified to do this. But let's read verses 34 to 36. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear come and carry off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. You see what? David did not trust in his own abilities. He trusted in God. And too often in this life, we put all our trust in what we can do. We put all our trust in our abilities. But here is a young shepherd who says to Saul, you know what? I've seen God do this. And so when the enemy wants to come and tell you, you cannot do this, you have not the ability to do it, you remind him of what God has done. Because it's not you who do it, it's God who does it. Okay? We all have testimonies of what God has done in our lives. Remind the enemy of it. You know what? When I sometimes come to prayer, or in my room in the mornings, it's not always just easy to start praying. It's not always easy just to connect and to read the Bible. But when I start to remind myself of what God has done, when I start to thank God of all the things He's done in my life, it's like something growing in me. It's like I get excited. It's like I'm in awe. God, you have done all of this. You know what? And Israelites have so many testimonies of what God has done. They could have easily said, who is this guy? God has opened the Red Sea. He rescued us from Egypt. He gave us manna. He defeated guys. They defeated themselves when we were in war. They had so many testimonies. He made the sun stand still. But all they saw was this giant, and they were afraid. What are you seeing today? Are you seeing a giant or uncircumcised Philistine? Number 3, we get tempted to look like others. In our journey in overcoming, we get tempted to look like others. This is a big temptation. And you will see this. Everyone wants to worship in the same way. Everyone wants to be a school teacher and look the same way. There's always pressure. There's always comparison. And people want to put their things on you. And this is what happened to David in verse 38. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. People will put their expectations on you. Things that they didn't do or want to do, they're going to put it on you. It's going to make you heavy and you'll not be able to walk. What has God given you? Don't take other people's stuff on you. It will not help you in this battle. You have to take what God has given you. And this is what David did. He took those things off. He said, no, I've not worked in this before. I cannot work in this. And he went with his sling. He got a few clippies. What's that? Rocks, pebbles, and his stick. I don't know what was he going to do with the stick, but anyways. So are you afraid that God's provision for you is not enough? Are you afraid what God has given you, your giftings, your talents, is not enough? And this is a big one today. Because many times we don't do things because we think what we have, what God has given us, is not good enough. Remember, it's not about you. It is about what God has given you, what He can do through you. David's trust was in God's provision and not in Saul's. Is your trust in God provision or in someone else's provision? In helping you do what God has called you to do, in taking ground, overcoming sin, being obedient, walking in your purpose. Number 4, the enemy will curse you, intimidate you, and break you down. Is this a surprise to anyone? No, I'm sure not. Because we fight this daily in our heads. Yeah, see what you did there. No, you can't do this. You are not good enough. We hear these voices all the time, and I'm sure you've heard that book, The Battlefield of the Mind, and it's so good because it happens here. The battle is here in our mind. Things breaking us down. Even people in our lives breaking us down. And this is what happened to David as he approached Goliath to fight against him. Verse 42, he looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to him, am I a dog that you come to me with a stick? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. The enemy will intimidate you, will break you down. He wants you to be fearful. Goliath wanted David to think, oh no, what have I done? Look how big this giant is. Instead, what did David do? He ran to the battle line and he took out his pebble and he threw it. Are you afraid that you will lose? When all these thoughts come in your mind, are you afraid that that is the truth? That you really are just nothing? You see, because if that is our fear, it's very difficult to go into battle. Because if that is our fear, it's very difficult to stand before a giant in the natural. But I love how David responded to Goliath. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses, the Philistines' army, to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. You see what? It was never about David. It was never about David being the hero in the story. He did not get here, saw the giant and thought, I'll show them. I want to be the hero of this story. And sometimes that is our intentions. We get into this situation, but we have to overcome, and we're already thinking about our testimony, how I'm going to look when I overcome this, how I'm going to look when I get in that place. But it's never about David. All he's seeing is that the enemy is defying his God. And he says, I want to see God glorified. How dare you stand here and think that you are better than God? It was never about David. It was about God and his glory. You know what? And if you don't believe me, go read the Psalms. See how David writes. See how he is so in love with God. He knows him intimately. He writes him love songs. He tells him his heart. And when he goes through tough things, he says, Lord, this is tough, but yet I will praise you. I trust in your name, and I know who you are. So today, that question, what are you afraid of? Maybe we should ask, who are we giving glory? You see, because the Israelites were so afraid, they couldn't walk in what they're supposed to walk, because they were putting their focus on themselves, trusting in their own abilities, trusting in their own provisions. But David did the opposite. For him, it was about God and God's glory. And I want to tell you, when you step out in what you're supposed to do, sometimes you're going to look like a fool. But it will be okay. Because it's not about you. It's about God's glory. And so the word for us today is, guys, get up. Take the ground. Get rid of that sin. Be obedient. God has called us to be Davids and not shrink back, but to see his kingdom come. To see his will be done and to see him glorified through what we do. Are you okay with that? Okay. Let's say amen. Amen.